Picture a farmer standing in his doorway at dawn. The tide is out. The bay is calm. It is an ordinary morning on the coast of early medieval Ireland. Then he sees the sails, low and dark, coming in fast on the wind. He does not reach for a spear. No one on this coast could fight these men and win. Instead, he reaches for a flat stone set into the floor of his own house. Because the raiders rowing toward him did not cross the sea to kill him. They came to take him alive. A dead man is worth nothing at the market in Dublin. A living one is worth a year of silver. So the whole village does something that sounds impossible. In the time it takes those ships to beach, dozens of people simply cease to exist. The raiders come ashore into empty houses, cold hearths, and open doors. No bodies, no captives, nothing to sell. Tonight we are going to follow that morning all the way down. We will look at why the Vikings really came to Ireland, and it was not for gold. We will look at the underground world these families built to beat them, chamber by chamber. And we will ask the hard question at the end. When the ships landed, did vanishing actually work? Begin with the thing most stories about the Vikings get wrong. We picture the raids as smash and grab. Burn the monastery, seize the gold cross, sail away rich. That happened. But gold was the bonus. People were the business. By the middle of the 9th century, the Norse had built an economy that ran on human beings. A captured person had a name in their world. A thrall. An unfree labourer who could be worked, sold, gifted, or shipped 1,000 miles from home. Great households across the Norse world needed thralls to function, and that demand had to be fed from somewhere. It was fed by raiding, and Ireland was close, wealthy, and carved up into dozens of small feuding kingdoms that could never unite fast enough to stop a fleet. To a slaver, that made the island close to perfect. The raiders were not looking for a fair fight. They were looking for a harvest. And the crop was you, your wife, your children, and your neighbours. And this was not a single bad year that a community could grit its teeth and survive. Open the Irish annals, the year-by-year records the monks kept, and the raids come at you in a grim, repeating drumbeat. A monastery plundered here, a settlement burned there. Captives carried off, again and again and again, across decade after decade. For the people living on the exposed coasts, this was not a disaster, it was a climate. You did not prepare for the raiders the way you prepare for a storm that might come. You prepared the way you prepare for winter, which always comes. That is the difference that explains everything about to follow. A one-time fright gets you a panic. A permanent threat gets you engineering. Sit with what that means for a family on the coast. A war will not save you, because raiders can wait or burn you out, or simply come back next season. A blade will not save you, because they outnumber you, and they do this for a living. The one thing that saves you is not being there when they land. You cannot outfight a slaver. You can only refuse to be his cargo. And consider what waited for the ones who did not get away. A captive of standing, the son of a chief or a churchman, might be ransomed, bought back by his kin for a fortune in silver and cattle. That was the lucky end. For everyone else, the ordinary farmer, the young woman, the child, there was no one to pay. There was only the market. They were held in a coastal base, then loaded aboard and carried off to be sold, worked until they were used up, in a place whose language they would never learn, among people who would never know their names. To be taken was not to die. In a way it was worse. It was to be erased from your own life while still breathing. That is what the stone in the floor was really guarding against. And here the Irish did something genuinely clever. If the raiders wanted bodies, then the entire defence of a coastal settlement narrowed to a single idea. Make the bodies disappear, not the silver first. The people. Everything else in the village could be replaced. A captured child could not. Under the floors of ordinary houses, under the banks of ordinary farms, they dug a second Ireland, an underground one. We call these structures souterrains, from the old words for under the ground, and more than 1,000 of them have been recorded across the island. Some single counties hold 400 and 500 each. They are among the most common ancient monuments in the whole country, and for a long time nobody was quite sure what they were for. They are not tombs. No one is buried in them. They are not mines. There is nothing down there to dig for. They are handmade passages and chambers, lined with dry stone, roofed with heavy slabs, running just under the surface of the living world. Most of them date to the early medieval centuries, the same stretch of years when the Norse were raiding hardest. That overlap is not an accident, and by the end of this you will see exactly why. Picture how one was made. The family digs a trench, sometimes several feet deep, branching off from inside the house or from a hidden spot in the yard. They line the walls with stone, no mortar at all, just skill, each course of stone leaning slightly inward as it rises. Over the top they lay lintels, slabs so long and heavy that no man could shift them from above. Then they bury the whole thing and let the grass close over it. Within a season the ground looks untouched, a house, a field, a quiet farm. And underneath all of it, invisible, a place for the family to go. There was a second reason to dig, and it made the first one easier to hide. Underground the temperature barely moves. It stays cool in summer and never freezes in winter. That makes a souterrain a natural larder, a cold store for milk, butter and grain. A passage under the house, then, was not automatically suspicious. Half the farms in a district might have one for perfectly ordinary reasons, which meant a raider could not assume that a hole led anywhere but the butter. The everyday use was camouflage for the desperate one. Look at where they cluster, and the pattern tells its own story. Souterrains are thickest across the north and along the coasts and river valleys, exactly the ground a fleet could reach from the sea. They sit tucked into the ringfalls and raths where families lived, the circular earth-banked farmsteads that dotted the whole island. The souterrain was the ringfort's last room, the one you could not see from the surface. Together they formed something close to a hidden network, thousands of small refugees scattered across the landscape, each one built to the same rough logic by people who had never met, all of them answering the same question in the same language of stone and dark. No king planned it. The threat planned it. Everyone facing the same danger arrived at the same design. Now here is the detail that should stop you. The entrance was almost never obvious. It might sit under a hearthstone, opening from the corner of a home. It might be a gap behind one loose stone in a field wall. Some opened through a hole barely wide enough for a grown pair of shoulders. The concealment was the entire point. A raider could stand in your kitchen directly over your family and see nothing but an empty room and a dead fire, which raises the obvious problem. If a slaver did find the way in, what then? A hole in the ground can trap the people inside it just as easily as it hides them. Corner a family underground and you have saved yourself the work of chasing them across a field. So the Irish built the answer to that problem into the tunnels themselves, and this is where these structures stop being clever and start being frightening. Here is a detail almost everyone misses about souterrains, and it is the whole reason they worked. The best of them were not passive hiding holes. They were machines for defeating a pursuer, and the trick was built into the shape of the passage. What looks like a rough tunnel is actually a designed killing ground, and once you understand it, you cannot look at these places the same way again. Deep inside a great many of them you find something archaeologists call a creep. The passage, roomy enough to walk stooped, suddenly clamps down to a low, tight squeeze, sometimes only a foot or two high, often offset hard to one side. To get through it, anyone chasing you has to stop, get down flat on his belly, push his weapon ahead or leave it behind, and crawl through head first, blind, one man at a time. On the far side of that squeeze, in the black, the family is waiting. A raider coming through a creep is not a warrior anymore. He is a head and a pair of shoulders, inching helpless into a room full of people who know every stone of it. One defender with a rock could hold that gap against a whole crew, because the crew can only arrive one crawling body at a time. The best souterrains stacked the odds even higher. Some ran a second creep behind the first, so a man who survived one squeeze faced another. Some opened into a small guard chamber right at the choke, a pocket where a defender could stand over the hole and wait. Others doubled back on themselves, or branched into dead ends that a stranger would follow into nothing while the family slipped the other way. A few hid sudden drops, steps down into the dark, that a pursuer would crash into while the people who built the place stepped over the edge without a thought. Every one of these tricks did the same job. It took the raiders' advantages, their numbers, their swords, their nerve, and made them worthless. You were not only hiding underground, you were dragging the enemy onto ground where he could not win. And through all of it, they were silent. That mattered more than any stone. A crying baby, a cough, the scrape of a foot could hand 20 people to the slavers at once. So these families trained themselves in a discipline we can barely picture. Sit in total darkness, in the cold packed shoulder to shoulder, and listen to strangers tear apart the home above your head and make no sound. For an hour, for a night, for as long as it took the ships to give up and go. If watching this makes you want to put your own hands on the past instead of just watching it, that is the whole idea behind the Medieval Way store. It starts with the Medieval Bakery Collection, the practical recipes book for the dishes these households actually cooked, the sourdough manual for keeping a living leaven the old way, and the sourcing guide for finding real heritage grain. The bread is where that kitchen begins. By the year 900, the raiders had changed as well. The Norse were no longer only visitors. They had thrown up fortified harbours along the Irish coast, long forts, bases where fleets could winter and captives could be held. One of them, at the mouth of the Liffey, hardened into a town, Dublin. And Dublin became one of the busiest slave markets in the entire Viking world. People seized in Ireland were brought there, held, sold, and shipped onward, some carried far to the south and east and never seen by their kin again. The families climbing into those tunnels were not hiding from a bad afternoon. They were hiding from a supply chain that reached across the sea. That is the stake that lifts this above a curiosity. Every souterrain in Ireland is physical evidence of an economy that treated human beings as inventory, and of ordinary people refusing to become a line in someone else's accounts. They could not outvote it. They could not outfight it. They dug. So the question that matters is the one we opened with. When the ships actually landed, did it work? Often, yes. A raid lived on speed and surprise. Raiders wanted to be back over the horizon before the local king could gather his warriors, and a gathered Irish king could be deadly. They did not have days to spend prying up floors and excavating a whole farm on the chance that someone was under it. A settlement that stood empty, its people simply gone, was a settlement that had beaten them. The raiders grabbed what they could carry and moved to an easier mark down the coast. An empty village was a failed raid, and a failed raid wasted a tide. Vanishing turned a family from a prize into a shrug, but not always. And we have to be honest here, because the tunnels do not only tell a story of escape. In a handful of excavated souterrains, archaeologists have found human bones, not careful burials, people who went down and never came back up. We cannot always say how they died, but a hidden chamber carries a terrible flaw. If the raiders find the entrance or set the house above it on fire, the safe place becomes a sealed one. The walls that hid a family could just as easily trap them. The darkness that saved 100 households killed a few. That is the true weight of these structures. They were never a magic trick that always worked. They were a gamble that usually paid off, taken by people who had no better bet to make. Every time a family climbed down and pulled the stone across the gap above their heads, they were wagering that the raiders would lose patience before they lost hope. Most of the time they won that bet. The proof is plain enough. The population survived. The farms kept turning. The tunnels kept being dug, generation after generation. Nobody keeps building something that fails. There is one last thing the souterrains tell us, and it is the part that stays with you. These were not raised by an army or ordered by a king. There is no grand fortress here, no royal engineer signing off on plans. They were built by farmers, family by family, house by house, with nothing but stone, muscle, and a hard, clear understanding of exactly what was coming for them across the water. A castle wall says a kingdom is afraid. A souterrain says a household is. This is defence at the smallest and most human scale there is. A father, a mother, and a hole in the ground just big enough for the people they could not bear to lose. The raids eventually faded. The Norse settled, converted, married in, and became part of Ireland rather than a wave breaking on it. The slave market at Dublin wound down, and the tunnels, no longer needed, slipped out of memory. Floors were relaid, fields were ploughed, the grass closed over the entrances for good, and the second Ireland went quiet beneath the first. But the memory of them never fully died. It went sideways into folklore. As the centuries passed and the reason for the tunnels was forgotten, country people still knew that certain mounds and hollows were not to be disturbed. They became fairy places, homes of the good folk, ground you did not dig or plough if you were wise. A farmer might avoid a spot his grandfather had avoided, without either of them remembering that the real thing buried there was not a fairy but a doorway, and behind it a room where their own ancestors once hid from being sold. The superstition was wrong about what lay below, but it was right about one thing. That ground was haunted, in the only way ground ever really is, by what happened on it. Today they surface by accident. A tractor drops a wheel into a void. A collapse tears a black gap in a green field. And for a moment you are staring straight down into the worst mornings of someone's life, into the cold dark where a family once sat holding their breath while the men who wanted to sell them walked back and forth overhead. The stone is still there. The silence they kept is still there. Only the fear has gone, and if you crouch at the mouth of one, you can almost feel the shape of where it used to be. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe and stay with us. What would you have done? Dug in and hidden or run? Tell me below.